Let's hit it.
And welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Valarie Drown, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
All right, here we go. What you think about, you will bring about.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome back to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Valarie Drown, and I'm thrilled that you can join us today. We're going to learn about an initiative called the Alzheimer's Disease Caregiver Support Initiative. And personally, I hadn't heard of it before, so I'm really excited to learn more about that. But first, I always want to welcome people to the show. We always get new listeners from around the world. So if you're not familiar with Alzheimer Speaks, bottom line, I started this show because my mother lived with the disease for 30 years, and I thought it was really important to connect people to services, products, and tools around the world that could support them. So welcome, and feel free to share our episodes. We've been doing this since 2011. So you can go back into our archives forever. Also, if you liked our opening music, it's called Clarion Call by the Mark Arneson Band, and you can download that on any of your favorite music platforms. I do want to just let people know, too, we have updated our main site, alzheimerspeaks.com. We have one whole page that is full of educational resources that's really easy to click on, from the radio show to dementia chats and memory cafes and so much more. So go to the site to find out about that. Also, we do a couple of support groups. One is Arthur's Memory Cafe. That is held the second and the fourth Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m. Central Time. Anyone in the world is welcome to join us. We do that virtually. And then the Caregiver Connect program, if you're in Minnesota, around the Shoreview area, Brookdale North Oaks sponsors this, and I facilitate the group. We meet the last Wednesday of the month, so that actually is tomorrow at 10 a.m. And what else can I tell you? With that one, there's also respite care. So that's really nice to have that type of support there. I want to give a shout out to Dementia Map. If you haven't checked that out, please do so. There you will find all kinds of great resources, again, around the world to support you and what you do. Couple more things. Artist Senior Living is sponsoring a program I'm going to be doing that's open to the public called Realities of Dementia, and that is about giving you family-friendly tools. That'll be a virtual webinar Tuesday, September 20th, 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern Time. And you can go ahead and register that by going to theartistway.com webinar. And if you're in Minnetonka, Minnesota, on October 30th, I'll be doing a film screening and talk back of The Timeless Love. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at radio@alzheimerspeaks.com. We're going to hear from the Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner, and we'll be right back to talk with our guests.
I love the footbar walker, and let me tell you why. It is the option for my toolbox that I've been waiting for. Let's be honest. There are some clients who, despite our best rehab efforts, just aren't able to return to performing a sit-to-stand transfer on their own. Now I can offer my caregivers an easier, safer option that doesn't involve hoisting their loved one up from a sitting position. I don't recommend this walker for all of my clients, but I do recommend this walker for those caregivers looking for an easier, safer option with transfers. I would also encourage other therapists to add this walker to their toolbox. It's kind of like having my own mobile parallel bars for the client to pull up on. Whether it's a family caregiver at home helping a loved one with Parkinson's or dementia, CNAs in a long-term care facility assisting their patients, or therapists adapting to client and caregiver-specific needs, we now have a very safe and effective option to offer in the footbar walker. Check this product out at thefootbarwalker.com. That's it for today from Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner. Have a great day, and don't forget, if you can't do it, adapt it.
Well, we are back, and it's time to learn more about how we can support families dealing with dementia and grief. Did you know that National Grief Awareness Day is today, August 30th? And, there are so many different days out there. It's hard to keep up, but this is such an important one because grief is a big element when you are dealing with any form of chronic illness, and especially with dementia, not only for those diagnosed, but for their care partners. So today I am pleased to be talking with Valarie Drown. She is the project director for the Alzheimer's Disease Caregiver Support Initiative. And she has been working with individuals who have dementia and their caregivers for nearly 20 years. And she is personally a sandwich caregiver herself. So welcome, Valarie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Lori?
I'm doing good. We've got the Minnesota Fair going on here, and
nice.
our weather is holding out, so that's kind of sweet. But
that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, it's also a sad end to the summer, which we're going to miss. They always seem so short. But I'm so thrilled that you had time to take with us today. Before I get into my line of questioning, I always like to ask if you've been personally touched within your own family or circle of friends by any form of dementia.
So I am a caregiver. When I was 13 years old, my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's disease. So that kind of formed who I am and how I wanted to proceed forward. So then I have always focused my employment around helping people with dementia. My uncle, who was like a father to me, he died in 2020 with vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease. My mother currently has Lewy body, and we are looking for nursing home placement. And my son has autism and about 6 mental health diagnoses that we've been struggling with for years. So I'm a caregiver on both sides. True sandwich.
Oh my gosh, you were in the thick of things from all different angles. And it's kind of surprising, I think, too, how much overlap there is, and yet there's so much difference between, when you're caring for different dynamics. Have you found that as well?
I have. In fact, my husband and I have made comments about sometimes the way my son speaks and now the way my mother speaks. There seems to be just this same dialect they use. They go back to very pragmatic ways of thinking rather than being able to read in or understand expressions. So it's very interesting, very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the Alzheimer's Disease Caregiver Support Initiative. What is it, and when did it start?
It's very exciting. So this is in New York State. So we are in our second round of grant funding. It's funded by New York State Department of Health. And the goal of the initiative is to reduce caregiver burden associated with caring for an individual with Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. So our goal is to strengthen the caregiver through resources, support, assistance, with the result of delayed institutionalization. So our first round of funding started in 2016, and we were given $7.5 million to assist caregivers in 6 counties in what we call the North Country, so the very eastern part of our New York State. So during the first round of funding, we were able to serve 6,068 caregivers who were in need of support. So to me, 6,000 in this small rural area of New York State was absolutely wonderful. So then we applied for the second round that came out, and we were awarded again, and they increased our funding to $8.25 million, but they added in the goal that they wanted us to reach underserved populations. So we defined our underserved as rural and economically disadvantaged. And so within our 6 counties, we have 2 counties, Essex and Hamilton counties, that are underserved based on their population size. And we have another county, Franklin County, that's underserved due to low socioeconomic status. So through our program, we offer ongoing care management. We offer Project Lifesaver in collaboration with our local sheriff's departments in each county. We have support groups in education in collaboration with the Northeastern New York Alzheimer's Association. We have caregiver wellness programs where we focus on trying to maintain health and wellness of caregivers. We provide respite, which is so needed, especially in our area, memory cafes, and another program called Music and Memory. So we want caregivers to have as many resources as possible and provide wraparound support. So we're consistently referring to our local offices of the aging. We have a Center of Excellence in Alzheimer's Disease in Glens Falls, New York, where we focus on clinical services, and the Alzheimer's Association, which offers a wide range of services, including the 24-hour helpline, because as most of us know, crises takes place when offices are not open. So that's kind of the caregiver support program in short form.
That's a lot. It's exciting that you've gotten that much money to really, make a difference. Families are in such great need. I love that you're working with Project Lifesaver. I think that is so helpful. I do want to ask one question really quick, and that has to do with respite. How did you guys do during COVID? And, was that shut down for a while with that? And then are you back up and running at this time?
We are. So our services, we went remote for, I think it was 4 months, and then we came back into the offices. And as long as people were comfortable and restrictions were loosened a little bit, we were doing in person. As far as our respite goes during COVID, our biggest difficulties were for those caregivers who were utilizing agency services. So if they had day programming, the day programs were shut down. And so those caregivers all of a sudden had increased responsibilities again. So work became very difficult for those caregivers. Getting a break became difficult. We were still sending in independent providers as long as the caregivers were comfortable. And so our respite program didn't really suffer. I mean, there were reduced numbers, obviously, but it was more so with the agencies that shut down, so the day programs, social and medical model day programs.
Well, that's fantastic, because I people would just call me hysterical, going, I don't know if I'm going to die or they're going to die before we see one another. I mean, there was such great fear and not being able to see their loved one, if they were placed, and then if they were at home, not having any form of respite because everything was shut down. And to this day, I still see, so much still shut down and out of business. And we've got to do better. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about National Grief Awareness Day, because so many people refer to Alzheimer's disease as the long goodbye, which drives me personally bonkers. That when my mom lived with it for 30 years, and I still can't call it that. But I know many do out there, when they're watching their loved ones, slowly progress through this disease. There's so many losses on so many different levels. Is there a name for this type of grief that, when you're grieving someone who is still alive, but, you feel this just significant loss for them?
I think I've always just called it grief. There is no other way to put it. There's no good acronym for it. It's just plain grief. It's the struggle of seeing somebody that once was so vibrant. My mother was she was a nurse. She was a registered nurse, and she always had her stuff together, and she was always in charge, took charge. And now I see where she can't manage her own world. She doesn't remember who I am. She doesn't understand any medical terms. She thinks she's still working. She's talking about care planning. And actually having Alzheimer's disease was her biggest fear because it was her mom that died of Alzheimer's disease. So it's seeing the vibrant person that you once knew turn to have the look of, this probably isn't a nice way to put it, but, it's the lights are on, but they're just not with you. And she has a look to her eyes where she is alive, but she's not living. Mm-hmm. So that's how that's how I see it as the grief for people, is just that change in the person you knew to the person they are now. But I use that to then say, but I look for ways that I can still make memories with my mom, even though they're only memories for a moment. They're memories with my mom, and that's what I look to do each time I visit her.
That's the attitude I always had too with it. I will mention for our listeners, there's a woman, in fact, she's from Minnesota here, Pauline Boss. I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, Valarie, but she's written a lot of books on grief, and one of them is called The Myth of Closure, Ambiguous Loss, and her most recent one, I think, was Ambiguous Loss in the Time of the Pandemic. But she's done stuff on caregiver grief, dementia specific, and she's just exceptional. And she was working also with the Duet Foundation on doing some programming that really helped people kind of process that as well. Grief is just, it's such a difficult thing, and the pandemic has, just kind of set a flare up in the air, with it, because everyone has felt it through the pandemic in one fashion or another.
Sure.
Now, I know a lot of people talk that there are different stages and types of grief. What are your thoughts on that? And I know what I've heard from people going through this. They say it's
sure.
They say it's a different grief than your typical grief group.
It is. So I can give the standard answer to start with, which is, so the Alzheimer's Association has a great resource out there, and it's titled Caregiver Grief, Mourning, and Guilt. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that or read that, you can go to their website, and it's alz.org. So they list the stages, and it's denial, anger, guilt, sadness, and acceptance. So now I'll give my answer, which is speaking through the lens of a caregiver. I have felt every one of those things on the list. I have fluctuated between them. I've gone back and forth. Sometimes I get stuck in a stage for a period of time, and then I move either forward or backward. And it's my belief that when we mourn for someone who's still alive, the process is longer. So as the individual with dementia declines, the process continues. So my goal as a caregiver is to look back and believe that I've done absolutely everything I can without regret, but that comes with a lot of pressure. So not only am I going through the stages all the time, fluctuating back and forth, and I will tell you acceptance is the most difficult one for me. It puts that pressure on me to constantly be functioning at my 150%, which is where the burnout comes in. So overall, I like the stages. I just think that for caregivers, I think we fluctuate a lot based on whatever situation that we're in or where our loved one is in the stage. It just takes a long time. It's exhausting at best.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. One of the things that I found, I work a lot with the memory cafes, and here in Roseville, Minnesota, we have a dementia-friendly group, and we developed a group called Former Dementia Caregivers Reentry Program, because when you're going through this loss, and you can be part of this group at a lot of different stages, from just struggling at home, maybe still living together, to somebody who has their person in an adult day program, respite program, to moving into a community to actual passing. And it was really interesting because when we asked we were seeing a need for something kind of after the memory cafe for people. And they were very specific and said, we don't want a typical 8-week grief group. This is different because we're going to be left all alone again after we go through that 8 weeks. And so the former Dementia Caregiver Reentry Program is really kind of set up like a memory cafe, where it's about community, it's about sharing, and it's about their specific needs, with slight guidance and support from the facilitator. But they feel so lost on so many levels, and yet need people who understand what it is they're going through. And so we found that kind of fascinating. I know Warren, I'm not very active in the group anymore with my schedule, but I know he's in the process of writing a workbook to help other people start something like that. And when you mentioned about, gosh, I've been through all of those stages, and it's so fluid, and you never know when you're going to kind of get nudged by one of them, and they can kind of hit you really hard, really fast sometimes, and you're like, well, where did that come from? But I'm right there with you. I also love that you mentioned the Alzheimer's Association hotline number. So many people have found such great support in being able to access that and talking with a professional. And I wasn't aware of their grieving and their caregiver grieving mourning and guilt paper. I think that sounds really interesting to read that article. So thanks for mentioning that. What are some of the coping mechanisms that you recommend for care partners dealing with all these emotions that are swirling in their heart, mind, and body?
Sure. So coping skills, they really vary in these difficult and overwhelming situations that we're in. So I will only speak to the ones that I've had to use or that I use myself. And I'll give just a touch more detail so that you understand, or so that the listeners understand. So through all of these situations with dementia that I've had experience in, when I talk about my son, so my son tried to kill me in 2018 by putting a rope around my neck. So when I talk about coping mechanisms, and in this next section where I'm talking about what has worked for me, it is truly out of heartbreak and through overwhelming situations that I've been in that I've had to use these strategies. Because normally I'm a pull-up-my-bootstraps kind of girl. But when you are overwhelmed on both ends, so a child who is so severely ill, and then the changing in your family members in a disease that eventually will take them, it has been a very difficult walk for me. So I say that these coping skills are the ones that I've used, and I just wanted to put it in perspective as far as how I'm going to attempt to explain what I use.
Sure.
So I rely on humor. I'm a sarcastic and funny individual. I love humor, and my mom can say some very funny things, sometimes because she's not putting her words together correctly. Sometimes she realizes it, sometimes she doesn't. And her and I will have a little bit of a snicker that will only last for a moment, but it's funny. So my sister and I laugh together afterward, not in the sense of making fun of her, but we're just putting a lighter spin on what we're both going through together. So that is one of the skills, coping skills, is if you can find something funny to laugh at, go ahead and laugh. It releases all of those endorphins in our body that we need in order to keep our mental health. Compartmentalization. I've had someone tell me that I am the queen of this coping skill, and oftentimes we think of it as a negative, but I'm going to spin it to a positive. So actually it's defined as a defense mechanism in which people mentally separate conflicting thoughts, emotions, or experiences to avoid discomfort. But for me, I think of it as there are boxes in my brain. So when I'm working, I keep as many other boxes closed that I can. So any worries related to my son or my mom, those boxes need to be closed so I can be productive. When I'm with my mom, I close my work box. So there are times when I have to switch gears, when there's an emergency with my mom or my son during the day, so I can open the boxes that need to be opened. If all my boxes are opened at the same time, I wouldn't be able to manage my world because I'd be overwhelmed and unproductive. If I close all the boxes at once, I'm not allowing myself to feel, and it won't help me process my world. So for me, compartmentalization is the way I'm able to open and close boxes in my brain to manage what I need to get done, to be productive and try to be successful in my caregiving. So that works for me. The 10-minute pity party. I allow myself a 10-minute pity party when I need it. So that 10-minute pity party allows me to sit in my feelings for a time, and it allows me to feel whatever is on my heart. Now, I can't stay at the party because that wouldn't be healthy, but I allow myself to attend the party, and then I graciously leave after 10 minutes. So I think each caregiver may have a different amount of time that they give themselves, but I find that the 10 minutes works for me so that I can then get myself going again. The other strategy that's worked for me is learning a new activity. So when my son after he tried to kill me, the psychiatrist said he had to go into residential placement. So I lost my purpose. I didn't understand what my purpose in the world was because I had been focusing my purpose around helping others, and all of a sudden I had lost somebody that I needed to care for. So if I do an activity that I've done for years, my brain can totally focus on the stressors of my life. But if I take up a new activity, my brain is required to learn. So it's too busy learning, and it can't focus its energy on the dwelling. So I took up sewing. I didn't know the first thing about sewing, not at all. But I decided to ask around, and I found a ladies' home bureau in my area. And I just showed up one night when they were open, and I said, I'm looking for some help. So these ladies completely took me under their wing, and they supported me in my new little adventure. And I looked forward to those evenings where I could only focus on the task at hand rather than on my sadness. So those are the coping skills, the positive coping skills that worked for me. And I will say that the negative coping skills are what often people focus their attention on. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am Joe, wonderful caregiver. So during all of this, my husband turned to alcohol for his coping skill, which then resulted in a 33-day rehab stay. So in the midst of all of this caregiving on both sides for me, then my husband had to go away, and I was dealing with everything on my own. So what we have to do is we forgive ourselves for the things that we don't do right. And we try to focus on making small changes in our world for the positive, to work on those positive coping skills that can help us get us through each day.
Wow, I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing all of that. For our listeners, again, if you want to call in, feel free if you've got any questions, or maybe you have some additional coping skills that are positive that you want to share. You can call into 323-870-4602. That's 323-870-4602. When you mentioned humor, it just made me smile because that was one with my mom we used a ton of. And yet so many people on the outside look at you sometimes like, well, that's not right. You shouldn't be laughing. This is serious. And it's like, hello? Laughter is one of the greatest gifts in any relationship. It's one of the most wonderful memories that you'll have. Why would you shut that down? I mean, and like you said, it physically makes changes in the chemistry of our body to help us better cope. So, I mean, I can name 1,000 different things where I would get the side eye by somebody. And one time it was even my husband. he was like, this isn't funny, this is serious. And my mom was roaring, I was laughing, my daughter was laughing. And we had to keep her relaxed and in the zone, or we weren't going to budge an iota on where we needed to do, where we needed to go to get her up. She had fallen and stuff. When you talked about, I'm not going to be able to say it, I'm going to trip over my words, compartmentalizing, other words for that might be, living in the moment. And, my mom taught me that as well, or dementia did. Like, the other stuff will still be there when you're done. Just be with me. And I had a really hard time, like, turning off my phones, and back then my pagers, and I was kind of the queen of multitasking, and prided myself on being able to do that. And it was like, and then I was pulled into this single lane, and yet it was so much more rewarding, got so much more done, felt so much better in terms of doing that, because you were really present, and you knew. I guess before I felt guilty because I wasn't tending to everything the way I should, and this way I could tend to one thing at a time, the way I knew would be best. Did you get that sense when you did that as well?
Yes, completely. And before I forget, Lori, I want to just say something related to what you've said, which is the opinions of others. I think we get so bogged down as a caregiver from the opinions of others. The opinions of others who don't understand because they've never walked it yet. Maybe yet is the key word. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't believe the advice or the statements that people have made to me. And we can either allow it to tear us down, to do the maybe I'm not doing enough, maybe I did it wrong, or we can use it to educate people. And that is where I go. I go to education because the opinions to me, if you've never walked in this situation, you have no idea the range of feelings I have, the hurt, the pain. There is just no understanding. And so rather than brush them off, I take those opinions and I use it as an educational point. So people will make comments to me, and I make sure not to do it in a mean way, but I speak from my heart. So when you say, thank you for being vulnerable, this is the only way I know how to be. And so I will say, if there are any callers that want to call in, you can ask me anything, and I will tell you how it's been for me. But again, I'm only speaking from my experience. But please, I'm happy to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's how I am too. That's how I got into this whole realm. I never thought I would leave. I loved, selling real estate for 25 years and, had my little niche and was doing really well. But it was like, nope, this is where I'm supposed to be. And,
exactly.
And I think having that authentic voice and that one that, accepts everyone's story, because everybody's story is a little bit different. That's okay. What can we learn from that? And I think there's so much pressure for a care partner to be perfect, and it's like, I'm sorry, but you weren't before the journey, so don't add that. Don't add that to your list now. Come on, be real. And but we know that there's so many eyeballs, watching us and judging us, and like you said, making comments on things that they don't know, and sometimes that can be family and really close friends that, well, I stopped in, she seemed fine. What are you talking about? You were there 15 minutes, or you were there 2 hours. Would you like a shift? Would you like a 24-hour shift? And then let's talk. Not that you, and I don't know about you, but then I got to the point of, God, they don't even trust me anymore. They don't, it's like they think I'm lying on what's going on. Would I really be making this stuff up? That just kind of threw me for a loop with some people too. So I think all the things you're talking about are really important. And then when you mentioned, the alcohol. Some people overeat, or they start gambling or shopping, or maybe they've done all those things before, but now it's a whole different ball of wax, or, having affairs, looking for some sort of peace somewhere outside where they live, because they just don't know how to cope. So I think it's so important for people to understand these coping mechanisms. And when you talked about the 10-minute pity party, I mean, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole and not pull yourself out. And so I like the 10 minutes. I mean, I've had my screaming matches with God down in the basement when everybody's gone and the windows are shut. And like, hey, I need a little help here. I am not doing well with this. But one of the things that I found was a good coping mechanism was, and it didn't hit me until I got this kind of angry with God and the whole situation, was I learned to ask, what's the lesson? Yeah. The whole time I thought I was trying to figure out an answer to fix it, but I was never asking, what's the lesson? And what I found was, once I started asking, what's the lesson, I saw things much clearer. Answers came to me faster, and they were good not only for me, but for my mom, who I was caring for, and to educate others as well in terms of possibilities of how do you switch up this situation, how do you work with it a little bit differently. So thank you again so much for bringing that up.
Sure.
Now, many caregivers are dealing with, navigating the stages of the disease and their grief while they're still working full-time jobs, or they're caring for other family members like yourself. What are some of the biggest obstacles and challenges that these care partners face? And also, is there a way, if they're employed, for their employers to help?
So I am a scheduler. I think that that's because so many areas of my life are out of control, that the things I can maintain control over, I keep a tight control. So I have a calendar. And so every day when I get to work, I look at my calendar. Caregiving and working, to me, is the most difficult with maintaining my schedule. So I plan out my meetings. I have the tasks required that I need to get done. I have my phone calls planned. And then all of a sudden there's a caregiver emergency. And I have to completely switch my gears, and I have to empty my work plate in order to fulfill all those caregiving duties. Now, I work for a wonderful organization. I work for the Research Foundation of SUNY Plattsburgh, and I will tell you that they are extremely flexible with me. I can't imagine the burden that some caregivers are facing when they can't just up and leave. I am telling you that my boss, I can send an email that says, I am so sorry, but my mother is having a really bad day and she fell. And the reply would be, you go take care of things. Thank you for letting me know. And so, I mean, a lot of people don't have that same response for their employers. But so in regards to employers, I think they need to offer some sort of flexibility when absolutely possible. So if somebody needs to leave, maybe they can return to work. Maybe they can work a little bit later to make up time. One of the things people will say to me, well, why don't you just use your sick time? Well, that's great, but I am always banking my sick time because I never know when that emergency is going to hit. And I might be out a week or 2 weeks. And so I'm always preparing as a caregiver for what's my next disaster I've got to get ready for. So it's not that I want to use my sick time to run and check on my mom, who, by the way, lives a half hour from me. So I have to go check on her and then go back to work. So if employers can offer the flexibility, I think that it would allow caregivers to be able to do the things that are important to them, because we want to be productive members of society. I love to work. I love my job. I love helping caregivers and people with dementia. I also love my family, and I want to care for both. So in order to allow me to be able to feel fulfilled on both ends, I need to have that flexibility as a caregiver.
Well, and don't you think, and I don't know, I could be wrong with this, but I think the pandemic brought that out more to people, saying, reevaluating their life and reevaluating what work means to them and what they need in a job. And it's not, money is nice, benefits is great, but flexibility is like a huge, huge demand out there right now. And
it is.
more and more people are going to be caring for people, because I know here in Minnesota, we're starting to see closures of nursing homes, assisted livings, all different types of things. Adult day, you're seeing parents that can't go back to work because there's not child care, for them to be able to go, or not at an affordable rate. And so people are really evaluating what is important for them to function at their core. And, and they're not willing to give that extra capital away. They just, you only have so many resources as an individual. And people are really, I think, starting to evaluate mental health a lot more, which I think is a really, really good thing, to be able to do. I'm so glad to hear that your employer is flexible. I'd love to see more stepping up in that realm. You'd love to see more leave available for families. I would love to see more programs in terms of even employee assistance programs to help family members with this. And I think a lot of them have them, but they don't tap into them. And I think employees are scared to say, I need this help, because they don't want to jeopardize their job, because they know caregivers are kind of categorized too. And looked at a little bit different. And so there's so many different levels out there in terms of needs, and how do you navigate things. I know for me, I pushed, my friends away because I was too busy. And you had mentioned you're a scheduler. My brothers would call me what did they call me? I called myself an organizer, and they were like, no, you're a control freak. Because I was like you, I was grasping at everything I could control. And I'm like, yet everything landed on my lap because I was organized. I did know how to schedule. I could get a lot more done than the average bear out there. But it's a two-sided, sword, the way people look at it, depending on what it is they want out of the situation. Anyways, that's what I've found. I don't know if you found that as well.
I have, and our world becomes very small as caregivers. And if it is a choice for me between going out and socializing with my friends or taking a hot bath and reading a book before bed, I'll pick the book and the bath any day of the week, because of that exhaustion and that feeling of just overwhelming fatigue. It's just our world becomes very small. And as we've said before, we want people who understand us. And a lot of my friends don't understand this. And so, not for their lack of trying, it's also on my part as well. But I've made my world small.
Yeah, well, and I get that, making your world small, because it's more controllable. There's less drama. You got enough going on, and the more people you have in your circle, the more potential there is for that. And you just don't have it to give. So I totally understand that, and I think a lot of people are going through that even now, just with the world being so crazed. How many people do you know that don't even put on the news anymore because they can't stand the overload? And if you you add the state of affairs of our country or the world at large on top of feeling overwhelmed from being a care partner, or maybe a person living with a chronic illness, that's devastating to people, because you're cutting one more circle out of their norm, for them that they used to rely on that. Gosh, I can't believe how fast the time is going. We've got about 15 minutes left, but this is a great conversation with you. Now, I want to get your opinion about early diagnosis. Do you think it's important for someone who has some symptoms, potentially dementia, to go in and get diagnosed? And And if so, what do you think are the benefits not only to them but to their care partner?
I do think it's important. I think that early diagnosis, it helps the family with processing through education. It helps with lining up resources. Whether you're ready for the resources or not, you still get yourself lined up with them, and getting affairs in order. So going back to the stages of grief, if a caregiver gets stuck in denial, they're often entering into the referral system during a time of crisis. And crisis is not the time to be looking for services, because service implementation takes time. So where do people end up? Emergency room. So if we can reach caregivers prior to crisis, then planning can take place. So, for example, Project Lifesaver, because you mentioned, that you like this service. So Project Lifesaver is often denied by people. And their reason is, and I'll use Dad as an example, Dad hasn't wandered yet. Mm-hmm. If we wait until crisis when Dad has wandered, there's no system in place, and we become more reactionary. So that diagnosis will help caregivers understand what to expect, what is possible, and how to deal with the setbacks that come throughout dementia. For the person with dementia, it helps them, it empowers them with the time to be able to make decisions, and making the decisions that will matter to them when they cannot speak for themselves. So I like the idea of an early diagnosis. I think it's important, and I think it helps families and the individual with dementia get their stuff together.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, you hear that all the time. Well, they are not a wanderer. Well, you don't know they're a wanderer until they wander. I mean, I have one woman in my memory cafe group, Connie, and she's given me permission to share this story. Her husband gave up driving, and, he had dementia. And I think it was 6 years later, one day, he just woke up and he picked up the keys and he drove off. 6 years later, he never fought it. There was no signs of it. And he took the car, and he even ran out of gas. And some nice construction guys filled up his tank for him, so he could get on his way. And then he was found going the wrong way on a freeway, and the police officer turned him around and let him drive home. And then they finally caught up with him. He was gone for, I want to say, 6 to 8 hours. And was quite a ways. But, you just don't know. One other thing that I like that is inexpensive, too, I don't know if you've heard of this, it's called the Call Alert Center. And they have a section just for caregivers. And it's where you can kind of pre-put a flyer together and your circle of friends. So if something ever happens, they will also work with the police and being able to distribute things out, because I had a friend whose sister wandered, and the police were like, well, she's an adult. She was in a board and care, and it was like, you've got to be kidding me. It was so disorganized, and so it's a way to empower yourself without having to look for a last-minute photo. When you're in the midst of crisis and trying to, get a hold of people, and the weight, the height, you get that while it's calm, because it's preventative. And this even works like if you're traveling, it goes out to the phone systems, and it really is something else. People can find that on Dementia Map, and it's just a wonderful resource. I'd love to see you guys listed on Dementia Map as well.
That's amazing.
There's so many cool things out there. And, again, people go, well, they've got a phone. But if somebody doesn't take their phone with them, or as the disease progresses, those things aren't helpful.
Yeah.
No. So, it's difficult. So, Project Lifesavers is a wonderful resource and has a great success record as well, with that.
It does.
What was I going to ask you now? If someone is listening and really struggling, as a care partner for somebody with dementia, what advice would you give them?
So I'd start with reaching out, talk to somebody, family members, friends. They're great, but so are professionals who work in the field. professionals like myself, we're able to empathize, but we're also able to be an objective listener. We typically have a really good understanding of the resources that are available. So, reach out. Accept help. So I am notorious for not accepting help, but instead I like to stretch myself very thin to 150%. So here's where I say do as I say and not as I do. So when people offer assistance, take it. Can I bring a meal in? Sure. Can I stop and grab the medicines that you need at the pharmacy? Would that help you? Sure will. I can come over and play some cards with your mom if you want to go out to dinner with your friends. Yeah, that would be great. So, I can take my superhero cape off for a little while and accept some help. Think about yourself. It's okay to be real. It's okay to understand what you need in order to maintain your physical and mental health. It's okay to take time to attend your own medical appointments, which, by the way, caregivers, that is what we tend to slack on, is our own medical care, me included. It's okay to go to the gym or go for a walk by yourself. You're not slacking on responsibilities. You're creating a stronger you, which is what we need to focus on. Join a support group. Every dementia story is different, but there are also similarities related to our feelings. Listening to others and sharing your own story helps. Maybe you faced a struggle and you found a helpful way of managing. Share it with somebody else. That might be exactly what that person needs in that moment. Then the time may come when you're struggling and someone will be there for you. Remember, we're all just working to survive in our caregiving world. And then finally, find some time to laugh. It is truly the best medicine, even in the difficulties. Try to end your day with one positive. And sometimes that positive is, I survived the day. People come up to you, how are you? And you say, good. Well, I've learned that sometimes I say I'm breathing in and breathing out, or I'm surviving. And although some people don't know how to deal with that, it is real for me. And so I am honest in who I am, and I think ending my day with sometimes just saying, I survived the day, yay me. That might be all I've got that day. But trying to find that one positive before you lay your head on that pillow at night.
Yeah, I think having even like a little gratitude book or that made such a huge difference for me. Was and even with our memory cafe, when we first started, we started out kind of opening up as everyone would go around talking about bummers and blessings. It's okay to talk about what's not working. This isn't Facebook and Instagram and TikTok when you're trying to impress everyone that your life is real. And what you'll find by even joining some of these groups, I don't care if it's, through your organization, through the Alzheimer's Association, a Facebook page, stuff I do. I mean, there's so many things out there. What I hear, and I would imagine you hear and feel this as well, is those conversations are so authentic and so real and so comforting and so supportive and so safe. Yeah. And one of the things that people a lot of times don't feel with on this journey is safe and comfortable. They feel tired, and there's distrust, and you have the shame and the guilt and the grief and all of that. I mean, you can just lose yourself, and when you lose yourself, you can't be the best possible care partner to someone else. And so, being able to find that link, find those coping skills, talking with others, because even though you might feel you're alone in what you're going through, and maybe your person has Lewy body and somebody else has vascular and someone else has mild cognitive impairment, there's still going to be so many things that you can learn and share. And, some people have multiple dementias. But I love the phrase, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one. I think that we just have to broaden that to expand it. When you've met one care partner, you've met one. Everybody's experiences and resources and resilience are different in their circumstances. And then, every environment changes those things as well. So I think developing a toolkit is the absolute way to go,
Yes.
because none of us, I don't think there's one of us on this earth that are a true expert or ever will be, because it's like a forever changing situation. There's so many different things to learn. I don't know what your thought is about the being an expert, but I just think that there's too many things coming online. It's impossible for any of us to know all of it.
Exactly. I agree. I always tell people I don't know everything. I know a lot of smart people, though, and I can go start asking questions, but I can't put the pressure of expert on me. That's too much to add onto my plate.
Yeah.
But I will listen.
Yeah. Well, and so often when we do listen, we learn, and that expands our knowledge base. And I think one of the most difficult things in being in this role or being diagnosed, with a chronic illness like dementia, is people think that they don't know anything. And what they have to remember is you always know more than somebody else, and you'll always know less than somebody else.
Exactly.
To me, that's not a valid excuse to not be part and step up and step in to your own reality, because it will make the journey so much easier for you in the long run, and you will help others. And people say all the time, gosh, I didn't know how much I really learned through this process, but as they hear other people's journeys, they realize, gosh, I've been there, I've done that, maybe this will help you. And everyone is brainstorming, and then that person is allowed options and insights that, gosh, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have had somebody to talk to, when we were going through this with my mom in the early stages. There was nothing. And so, very, very important stuff. I'll just add, too, for resources, Alzheimer Speaks has a free educational and resource page where you can find stuff like our dementia chats, where you'll hear from a person with dementia, what are their wants and needs, and what does it feel like to have dementia? And, I mean, we've got all different kinds of conversations and stuff. You can access Dementia Map there as well, but there's just tons and tons of things there. Just like I know on your website, which is wehelpcaregivers.com, is loaded with great resources. People can also call your 800 number, which is 1-800-388-0199, and they can also find you on Facebook and Instagram at We Help Caregivers. So, Valarie, thank you so much for just such a wonderful, authentic conversation with so many great tips and tools for people to be able to tap into during their journey.
I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Oh, this was wonderful. One more resource, again, I didn't know about. And again, I'll reach out to you about Dementia Map, because I think you'd be a great fit there for people on that. So again, people pass this along, like, click, and share. Don't keep information to yourself. Know how badly you needed it and what it can do for somebody else. It can make their day or break their day without this knowledge. So be there to lift somebody up. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you on Thursday, where we're talking with Cindy Lazinski with a dementia-friendly group in northern Colorado. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Meredith from the Senior Fitness with Meredith podcast, where I discuss all things for seniors, from fitness, your health and wellness journeys, how to be all over strong and beyond. I also have my mini podcast called Motivation with Meredith. It's a great, quick motivational pick-me-up for your days. Join me, listen now, search for Senior Fitness with Meredith on your favorite podcast platform.